All right, welcome to the Private Practice Elevation Podcast, Gordon Brewer. Thank you so much for joining us, Gordon. How are you doing?
Oh, it's great to be here, Daniel. I'm so glad to be on your podcast, which is great.
Yeah, I know it's
Yeah,
awesome, and it I do the same thing every single episode because when I reconnect with people, I'm always like, hey, it's been a while since we've actually chatted. So same with you as with many of my
yeah.
past guests who I've been having on this new podcast. It's so cool that I get to connect with so many people. So yeah. So what have you been working on over the last, I don't
Oh,
know,
wow. It's just,
year I think we
yeah.
spoke, something like that.
Oh, yeah. It's been, I need to go back and look when you were on my podcast. For those that don't know, I've got a podcast called The Practice of Therapy. And Daniel and I work in the kind of the same space, kind of same niche on different things, but a lot of stuff been going on for me with the practice of therapy. I launched, and I know we're going to talk some more about this, but I launched the G Suite for Therapists course back in 2017. And then this past year, I launched another course along with, collaborated with a friend of mine, Julie Harris, who runs Green Oak Accounting. And we launched another course called Money Matters in Private Practice,
Oh,
which
great.
just really goes into the details just around the whole financial side of being in private practice. So been real busy with those kinds of things and
Yeah.
doing the podcast. And then in addition to that, just my practice, just the regular group practice. I have a group practice in a place called Kingsport, Tennessee, which we're in the upper northeast corner of Tennessee, right in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. And so I've got a small group, I call it a small group practice. I've got 4 other clinicians working with me.
Great.
And so, yeah, so just plugging along here.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
before we get into what we're going to dive into about, we're going to talk about G Suite and, how to do that well for those who are mostly just starting out with their private practices. I want to just kind of go a little deeper into who you are and what you do. And always love to hear the origin story, as we, say
Mm-hmm.
for any comic book fans out there. What's your superpower? And then tell us how you got started doing what you're doing now.
Wow, great questions. Well, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been in private practice. I guess I could say I started private practice really kind of in earnest in around 2006. Prior to that, I worked for an agency. We worked. It was a nonprofit agency, and we worked mainly with at-risk children and youth and their families. And I would kind of work my way up through the ranks of that organization. Was a clinician, and then later a supervisor, and then when I left there I was a clinical supervisor, so for and supervised teams of counselors. But my dream had always been, I can remember back, and even as an undergraduate, of just thinking about going into private practice. And so, like I said, in 2016, I really began those steps. And I started my private practice really in the context of a church setting. One of the other hats that I wear, in addition to being a therapist, is that I'm also a clergy person in the Episcopal Church. And so, as I tell my clients and other people, sometimes I wear a funny collar and don't like to catch people off guard by that. But that's part of who I am and part of what I do. And then fast forward, in 2014, I had some other people that I had been supervising, and really decided to kind of go to form a group practice. So that was when I formed my group practice, Kingsport Counseling Associates. And then in 2017, really kind of a huge leap for me, at least it seemed like for me, as I actually bought the building that my practice is in. So
Wow.
that was a big learning curve, and really wasn't as scary as I thought it would be once I first did it.
Wow.
But
Great.
yeah, and so, but I started the practice of therapy. I realized after listening to several podcasts of different people kind of in this space, that I realized, you know, I've got some knowledge here just by learning things the hard way, and like to share that with folks. And so I started the practice of therapy. I believe it was 2016 is when I really kind of launched that, and then launched the podcast in 2017. And so started putting together some online courses and some other digital products and that sort of thing. So here I am.
Here you are. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
I love hearing people's stories, and I think that it's amazing to see your progression from, starting a private practice, and it's kind
Hmm.
of that natural scaling. People scale in different ways, but you followed a really really great path there. It seems like, you know launching your practice, supervision, starting a group practice, buying the building. It's cool. That's so cool. And then also going
Right.
into the online space as well, diversifying
Uh-huh.
incomes, that sort of thing. Very
Right.
very cool.
Right.
Kudos to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. It's yeah, and it's as I tell folks all the time, with the consulting and the private practice stuff, there's no exact right way to do it, but I think
Yeah.
you have to absolutely do what fits for you.
Yep.
And I've taken kind of the approach of kind of slow, steady growth, which has worked out well for me, rather than trying to get in
Yeah.
there and just you know grow really fast.
Yeah, that's funny. This is kind of like the exact same conversation I had with my wife last night, talking about uh, her growth in her private practice was very similar. Like she's starting her own like group practice. She's in the process of that. Like
Hmm.
she just rented her own office space with 4 offices. Um, and she started around 2010 or 11 in her
Hmm.
practice. But the same sort of thing is she's got a full practice right now, and she's starting to turn people away. And it was like, well, what do you think has been the driving factor? That just like, slow, consistent growth, not wanting to go into
Hmm.
debt, and just being
Yeah,
steady.
exactly.
And it's amazing how you can grow, certainly, by, if you've got the money to invest in ads and things like that, you can certainly grow
Hmm.
fast. But what's really worked for her, and she has decided not to grow fast, and it's really worked for her. So
Yeah, yeah.
totally relate
Uh,
on that.
right, right. Yeah, and true. I know. Not going into debt has been a huge thing for me. Of course, buying a building is a little different kind of debt, but that's
Right.
yeah, not doing any of those small business loans or any of
Yep.
that mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know one of the things that you learned and now teach, because you've been in the trenches of starting a private practice, is using G Suite as part of a therapy practice. Tell us a
Hmm.
little bit more about that, and how you got started with G Suite. And
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, for folks that maybe aren't familiar with the term G Suite, it's just G Suite is the suite of tools that a person gets when they have a Google account. So, most everyone's familiar with Gmail and that sort of thing, but there's also like a whole suite of tools that comes with when even when you open the free account of things like Google Docs, Google Drive, Google Sheets, Google Forms, Google Calendar, all of those tools. And um, when I started, really the way I landed on all of this was I wanted to have an email that looked a little more professional. In other words, it wasn't just kingsportcounseling at gmail.com.
right.
I really wanted to have like my name at kingsportcounseling.com and using my website URL. And so I started looking around at this, and lo and behold, Google offered a service to be able to do that. Now it's a paid service, which we'll talk about this a little more. One of the big advantages of having the paid service is that you can also make it HIPAA compliant, which of
Mm.
course that's something that we're all
Yeah.
concerned about and
Yeah.
need to certainly keep on the radar screen. But so when I started looking at it, you can get the paid version of Google G Suite. It's a paid account, and when you get the paid account, it just walks you through the setup to use your own website URL.
Hmm.
And so, excuse me, the only thing you really need to have is just access to your website and being able to sign off on authorizing all of that sort of thing. So, but the other thing about it is it's very economical. The paid
Yeah.
version of Google G Suite is only about $6 to $12 a month per user.
Hmm.
And you can also, for like in my case, I'm able to add other users to the account, and then they create their own. I create their email address that's also at kingsportcounseling.com.
Yeah.
And uh, so I started looking at all of that, and the big thing about HIPAA compliance is that um, Google, the one thing about Google and the size of Google is that they absolutely depend on security. If their system was hacked, they would just lose billions of dollars. So,
Yeah.
in that sense, I know that they're working behind the scenes to keep everything secure. But the one little clincher that people maybe aren't aware of is that if you've in order for something like a third party application to be HIPAA compliant is that you have to have what is called the BAA, the Business Associate Agreement, which is just essentially an agreement between you and like Google or whoever else you're using saying, okay, this is how we're going to handle your files and your data, particularly patient information or client information, to keep it secure. So
Hmm.
I like to use the analogy as kind of like with the internet. If we were thinking back in analog days when we all had paper folders and that sort of thing, the internet's kind of like me taking a client folder and walking out uh, in front of my office to the sidewalk and asking someone, "Hey, which direction are you going? Will you take this with you uh,
Hmm.
and make sure it gets to this particular person on the other side of town?" And that's a simplistic way of thinking about how the internet works. But the BAA really kind of makes an agreement to say, okay, the people that are handling the data is going to handle it securely. And also, along with that, is just understanding about encryption. So if I handed my folder to someone and they happen to open it up and look in it, I wouldn't want them to be able to read it. So that's what encryption does. And so,
Hmm.
anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that tangent
No, that's good.
about all that, but so really kind of the long and short of it is that Google Google G Suite is HIPAA compliant if you use the paid version and you sign that BAA with Google. So yeah,
Great. Yeah, I get
yeah,
that. I get that question a lot. From folks as we start on their website projects, and they
hmm,
always ask, should I have a an email address, at my new domain? And it's always, yes, absolutely. Like that's kind of step number one for looking professional. And somebody reaches out to you. There's just something
hmm,
about having that, at your domain. It just looks professional. And so
right,
I use G Suite myself for my business, so
hmm,
I'm familiar with setting that up, and I have developers and virtual assistant, and so they're all set up at uh, createmytherapistwebsite.com email addresses, and
right,
it's so simple to add people, and is, like as you said, economical. I've got a small team of 3 people, and we all have our business email addresses, and it costs me like 15-20 bucks a month to have that.
right, right. Yeah, and it's really when you think about the return on the investment of all of that, it's almost kind of a no brainer in a way. But um, the one thing I will say too about it is that with the whole suite of tools, in addition to the email, one of the things that I really kind of discovered as I was setting all this up is I was thinking, wow, I could really set up my whole office in the cloud, so to speak. And the one thing, and this might be something else that people might not really think about, is that actually storing stuff in the cloud is going to be safer for you than storing it on your computer. And the reason for that is that our individual computers, even though we put, you know, safety measures in place with virus software, antivirus software, and all that sort of thing. If you lose your computer and everything's on your computer, you're out of luck,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
SOL as we like to say. And
Yeah.
so it's yeah, and so actually storing it in the cloud is more secure. Plus, you've got the encryption and all of that sort of thing that is a much higher level by storing it there. And so I
Yeah.
always encourage people, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be like Google Drive. You know, Dropbox can offers a BAA, and I know like Microsoft Cloud and some of the others, you can get the BAA from them. But in my practice, one of the things that we do is that we're almost paperless at this point, but typically what we do, any paper forms that we get, we scan them and upload them to the Google Drive. And so in Google Drive, we've also got individual client folders within Google Drive. So it's like a virtual file cabinet in many
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
And so that way we store all their documents. And then the other thing too is that we do use an electronic health record system. I use Therapy Notes in my practice, and you can use those in conjunction with each other very easily. And what we do is we upload them to the Google Drive, and then also to the electronic health record system. So it's really kind of like you've got two copies of everything that's
Yeah.
held securely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to just back up for a second and just talk a little bit more about the BAA. And
Hmm.
so, like, take us through how you get started. So, step number one is
Sure.
you sign up for Google Suite. Is it
Right.
is it
Yeah.
the
Geez.
the business? Is it business.google.com? I think is
Yes.
where you go.
It's yeah. No, Daniel, you and I talked about this ahead of time, but I've got a hack sheet that you're going to be offering with this
Yep.
particular. And in that hack sheet, there's a link, and full disclosure, it's an affiliate link. So I do get a little bit of commission if you use that link. But if you'll just use that link, that'll take you to the Google Business, or Google G Suite for Business is the official name. And if you want
Gotcha.
to just Google that, you can look that up. And then
Yep.
they've got two or three plans there. I think there's a basic plan, then the business plan, and then an enterprise plan. Of course, as you go up, it's more in price, but the big difference between all of those is the amount of storage you get.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
you just go in there, sign up, and then it will walk you through the steps of setting everything up and even adding your URL, and asking you what you want to, what website you want to use for your URL. Um, and then also on that hack sheet is a link for to BAA, the Business Associate
Okay.
Agreement. And it's something you actually have to, it's just a few clicks, really, just to sign up for the BAA. And you can also Google that if you'll just, uh, Google G Suite Business Associate Agreement. You'll find it.
Okay.
And it'll
Great.
take you through that process. So it's very, very simple. No paperwork you have to fill out. You just check off some boxes, and then they send you, I think it's a PDF of the document. So it's all
Okay. Great.
done
Yeah. That sounds pretty simple.
electronically. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for putting together that hack sheet and for gifting that to our audience. And so
Hmm.
this episode is going to be episode 36, so people can get that at privatepracticeelevation.com/36. They'll be able to download that. Um,
Hmm.
okay, awesome. Well, what else do let me think here. We can go in
Yeah.
so many directions here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest things that have helped you as far as using G Suite? Like, and
Yeah.
there's so many tools. So I guess I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Somebody is thinking about starting out. Like, okay, they get signed up for it. They get that BAA.
Right.
Where should their initial focus be to get the most out of G Suite?
Right. Well, one of the things that I think, there's so many hidden gems within G Suite that I'm discovering and continue to discover. And
Yeah.
and one of the things is What one simple one is that if you are using Gmail, I know a lot of times one of the things that was just for me in my practice was is that I noticed I was sending a lot of the same emails to people.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of like I was responding to people asking about our services or responding to people to send them like our intake paperwork and all of that sort of thing. But there is, if you're in G Suite, I mean, in Gmail, and if you create an email, like a new email or reply to an email, down in the bottom right corner of that reply or that new email, you'll see like three little dots. And within those three little dots, you can set up uh, response templates. And so you create a template of of a response. And so when you go to respond, you can just click on that and it loads that particular email response in your response. And so
Yeah.
um, that's just a huge time saver of not having to type everything out. And
Yes.
yeah. And I think that's one of the
I
things that
use that a lot.
yes, yes. And then also I know something you use that I use is just the vacation responder, which you can leave on all the time and just have an automatic response for people. Particularly, I know if you get a lot of emails, it's kind of like you can put a response in there, thanks for your email. I'll try to respond within such and such a time. And if you're making an appointment, call this number and that sort of thing. And so
Yeah.
that way people don't fall through the cracks. Uh,
Yeah. And I think that's just also a good lesson for just your business growth and development is for looking for ways to systematize things to, cut down on the time you're spending. And especially too, if it's just you in your practice, my wife goes through this a lot. Sometimes there's those weeks where it's hard to get to the admin stuff. And so anything that you can do to cut down that time. And so I just encourage people to pay attention throughout the day, like what are the types of emails that they're sending, what are the types of things that they are constantly repeating, finding a way to create
right, right,
a system for that. Yeah, I just
right.
started using the vacation autoresponder just last week, just put that
Hmm.
together because I do get a lot of the same emails, and so we're using that as a way to just let people know we got your email. If you need help with this, go here. If you need help with that, go there. And so people can
Right.
find their answers. And we could also on our end just organize things a little bit better and understand who's going
Hmm.
to respond to all those inquiries.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're exactly right, Daniel. I think when we grow in our practices, the one thing that you have to do in order to grow and scale and that sort of thing is to learn how to automate things and also delegate things to other people. And I think with G Suite, there's so many different ways you can automate there. One of the things that I did that when I tell people about this, I'm always surprised how blown away they are by it. But one of the things that, talking about regular task and automation, one of the things that we all have to do is our documentation and like our session notes or progress notes, that sort of thing. And so one of the hidden gems to me of G Suite is something called Google Forms. And so
Mm,
with Google Forms, you can create surveys, you can create um, questionnaires, get, like if people are registering for something, you can create a registration form, just pretty much any type of online form you can think about.
yeah.
So I started thinking about that. I was thinking, what would be nice with writing a session note would be to go some in where and just click off a bunch of boxes, because one of the things I noticed about writing session notes, and I think most all of us do this, we write them pretty much the same way. We all have kind of a template we follow and different sections that we use. And even our wording is similar. I mean, each person is individual, but we typically use some similar interventions, and then what's going on with
Hmm.
the client can be similar. So what I did is I created a Google form where I could just go in and click off the things I did in the session and the interventions I used and what's going on with the client and all of that. And then I worked with an app script developer, and you'll know what that is, Daniel, but other people might not know, is that it's just the workings behind the scene, but all the magic that occurs with the programming and stuff behind the
Yeah.
scenes. I work with an app script developer to create something that when I check off all those boxes on the session on that form, it automatically creates a narrative in a Google Doc. And
Wow.
so it just, and so what I call that is the session note helper. And I've kind of, I've got those templates available along with the tutorials and all of that so that people can set that up. And then once they get that, they can also customize it to their own kind of phrasing and wording and that sort of thing. So but for me, it was just a huge time saver. It was a
Yeah.
lot of setup on the front end and spent probably way too much time getting it together. Uh, but now I
It's
can
so worth
write,
it.
yeah, but now I can write a session note um, in just a few minutes. Just go through, click
Wow.
off all the stuff, and boom, it creates the narrative. And then if I need to edit that in Google Docs, I can. And then I can also copy and paste from that Google Doc into my electronic health record system.
Yeah. Yep.
Because most of the electronic health record systems have pretty good templates already, but there's always a narrative portion that you have to type out. And the
Yeah.
less typing I have to do, the better.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
amazing. That's like sheer genius right there. I love
yeah,
that. That's
yeah.
very cool. So is that are those templates part of your G Suite course that you mentioned?
Yes, so I talk about they're not specifically a part of the course, but I do have the G Suite course, which is about, oh gosh, 6 hours of instruction on Teachable. And you're familiar with that platform, I know, Daniel, of just video lessons where I actually go on screen and show you how to kind of step by step set up different things. The templates are something different just because I had to hire someone to help me develop that. So I do
Hmm.
have that, but the course is available. And if people go to practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite course, they can get to that. The session note helper, they can just go to the URL sessionnotehelper.com, and that will get them to that. So
Awesome.
got those two things out there. And I think we said we're going to set up a discount for folks if they for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
We'll
can't.
put all the links and all that good stuff in the show
Yeah,
notes for this. Yeah, we forgot to discuss before the call what that
yeah,
discount would be. So we'll go
yeah,
get that straightened out and
yeah, yeah.
we'll
We
put that
will.
all in the
Yeah, I
show
do.
notes.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, and so that the other thing that I'm working on currently is also, in addition to the session note helper, doing same thing with treatment plans, and then uh, creating some dashboards, which are um, if people aren't familiar with dashboards, they're really kind of a hot item for business, and that you've got a way to collect data about your business. So, for example, your income, your expenses, your average income per session, all of those kinds of things. And those are usually done through spreadsheets, which Google Sheets is G Suite's version of something like Excel.
Hmm.
And it's, to me, it's much simpler to use than Excel. Just it's kind of a not a
Yeah,
stripped down version,
I
but
agree.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah, you don't have to have all the bells and whistles.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
cleaner. I've actually
yeah.
stopped using Word as well because I use Google Docs.
Hmm.
My business is also heavily relies on G Suite for sure.
Right, right.
I
So
love it.
yeah. So yeah, so there's just lots of stuff that you can do with all of that. Another application that people may or may not find useful is there's one called Google Keep, and it would be similar to something like Evernote or OneNote that people might
Okay,
be
I haven't
familiar
used
with.
that one. I haven't heard that
Yeah,
one.
and so that's all included with G Suite, and of course Google Calendar. I just absolutely depend on that um, Google Calendar for my, making sure I'm staying on track because I live by my calendar.
Yeah.
And
And what's
so
nice too
it's,
about that is that it plays really nicely with pretty much everything. Like
yes, it
your Google
does.
Calendar. Like I have that synced with Calendly for scheduling appointments, and also
Hmm.
17 Hats, which is an application I use for my one-on-one clients for scheduling and stuff like that. It seems to work
Hmm.
well with a lot of other apps, which is great.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that one out. 17 hats, you said?
Yeah, it's for like writing contracts and sending invoices,
Oh wow. Hmm.
bookkeeping. It's mostly geared towards like freelancers. So that's where I have more of the when I work with my custom website design clients, we
Hmm.
use 17 Hats for that stuff.
Yeah, that's I'll have to check that out. I always like a new gadget. Yeah.
Awesome.
So
Well, we're going to start wrapping this up here. Is there
yeah.
any last things that people need to know? Any last tidbit or hack that you would like to share before we wrap up our
Well,
discussion on G Suite?
well, I think the one thing I always encourage people to do is just go in and play around with it. I mean, you can't really hurt anything by doing that. And I think there's the other thing too is that Google has just tons and tons of tutorials and support in terms of learning new things. And I think just get curious about it is the big
Yeah.
thing. And it may or may not fit for you and what you want to do in your practice, and that's okay. It's I like it and I'm used to using it, and so I've gotten kind of acclimated to that. But I think it's for me, it's well worth the. I think my total bill for my practice is like $36 a month or something for
Mm,
all that we get with that, plus
yeah.
the
Wow.
storage and all of that. So well worth what you spend up by
Yeah.
getting the paid version of Google G Suite. And then just playing around with Google Forms. It's just another thing that I'll say this real quickly is I also created an online patient or client information form. And so now when we get new clients to get kind of some biographical information, why they're coming to therapy, that sort of thing, we just send them the link to that Google form, and they fill out the form, and then we get the narrative of that. And
That's
so
great.
it's really pretty handy.
Very cool. It sounds like you've really figured out how to use G Suite almost. I know I'm a little familiar with Simple Practice because my wife has been using it, but it's like
Yes,
a lot
yes,
of the things that does, you're doing it for a fraction of the cost. So that's
right,
awesome.
right.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and just for sharing all your knowledge about G Suite. And I'm sure we could geek out on this forever.
Yeah, we
Um,
could.
but so you mentioned at the beginning of our chat a little bit about your podcast, but just remind us
Yes.
where can people find you
Yes,
online?
yes, yeah. So if they'll just go to practiceoftherapy.com, that's my website, and you can find all my stuff there. I've got a free private practice startup guide. I've got a lot of free stuff. Plus, I've got the more, I guess, lack of a better way of putting it, kind of premium things, the courses, paperwork packets, and all of those kinds of things available. You can email me at just Gordon@practiceoftherapy.com. Happy to get emails from people and just hear from people. And so that's where you can find me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gordon.
All right. Thanks, Daniel. My pleasure being here.